As well as being one of the most prevalent internet memes, Obi-Wan achieving the high ground was a pivotal moment in the Skywalker saga. In doing so, Obi-Wan was able to take advantage of Anakin's arrogance and quite literally disarm him, eventually leading to his transformation into the cybernetic abomination that we all know as Darth Vader. But is the high ground actually an advantage? Many critics argue that this is just another stupid thing to come out of the prequel trilogy. In today's video, we will rebuke these claims and show why Obi-Wan having the high ground was such a conclusive moment during their duel on Mustafar. And for the 500,000 or so people who have already seen my short on this topic, I do apologise, but I think it requires a more in-depth explanation. Anakin Skywalker clearly had the advantage for the majority of the duel. And that's not to say that Obi-Wan was not holding his own. Nick Gillard, the man in charge of choreographing the duel, stated that Obi-Wan's fighting ability is at an 8, while Anakin's is at a 9. In my opinion, Gillard did a very good job at portraying Anakin's slight advantage. In his fight against Grievous, Kenobi is always in control of the duel, despite Grievous's terrifying flurry of attacks. However, on Mustafar, Kenobi is almost always the one retreating, and at a first glance, it seems as though Anakin is very much in control, and ultimately destined to win. As we shall explore later on, Anakin may not have had as much control as he believed, with his defeat being the result. But before we explore the intricacies of the pair's fighting styles, and how the high ground led to Anakin's defeat, we must first go back to basics. So what actually is the high ground, and is it an advantage? On Earth, the high ground has long been recognised as militarily important. In Sun Tzu's The Art of War, military leaders are advised to take the higher ground and allow the enemy to attack from a lower position. However, this is not really the case during a sword or lightsaber duel, as it doesn't really give you the increased range like it would in an actual full-fledged war. In fact, some fencers I've spoken to have said that sometimes it can actually be a disadvantage. Of course, the Jedi fight better than any swordsman here on Earth. Their reflexes are better, they can jump much higher, and they have a mastery over the Force. Despite this though, a fundamental truth still remains. The high ground is by no means a conclusive advantage. And of course, Kenobi's declaration that he has the high ground has a double meaning, suggesting he both has the literal and moral high ground, implying to Anakin that he cannot win if he goes down this dark path. Many claim that this line is just an in-your-face metaphor put in by George Lucas to show the moral nature of the duel, believing that Kenobi's physical position of the high ground makes little sense. Many cite how plenty of duelists in Star Wars have been defeated while having the high ground. Most notably, Darth Maul was defeated by Obi-Wan himself while having the high ground. The Kenobi from the Revenge of the Sith was not Darth Maul. Although powerful and skilled, Maul from the Phantom Menace was arrogant in his abilities and had little experience in fighting actual Jedi. He was also an aggressive Form 7 fighter and was not used to enacting defensive counterattacks. Maul had already mortally wounded a Jedi Master and believed he had already beaten a weak Jedi Padawan. He was simply toying with his kill at this point. The last thing he expected was for Kenobi to fly out of the reactor shaft, allowing Kenobi to defeat the Sith apprentice despite the great odds that were stacked against him, due to Maul's higher ground position. In addition to this, Kenobi had thought about this duel with Maul thousands of times throughout his life, analysing what Maul did wrong, what he did right, and how it could have ended differently. Kenobi was more than prepared for a situation like this one, and knew that if this situation ever arose again, he could win. Kenobi was a master of self-reflection and perseverance, arguably the main reasons why he was such a successful Jedi. As a youngling, Kenobi had not been very successful. He had almost been sent to the agricultural corps of the Jedi, as no master would take him as their apprentice. However, this lack of natural talent only aided Kenobi throughout the years. He was forced to rely on his wit and perseverance to become a truly successful Jedi Master. We see this again during Rebels with his quick defeat of Maul. Maul had tried to do the exact same move on Kenobi that he had used to defeat Qui-Gon Jinn, but Kenobi had again played this through in his mind so many times that he could easily counter it. His understanding that he wasn't necessarily the best Jedi informed his preferred lightsaber style, Form 3. otherwise known as Surisu. Surisu relied on energy efficiency, constant blade movement, and above all, a tight defense. Most importantly for the sake of this video, it relied on exploiting weaknesses in opponents, which we'll explore in more depth in just a moment. Kenobi wasn't just any Surisu user though, he was perhaps its most able adherent of a generation, and some have even claimed he was the best Form 3 user of all time. Before and during the Clone Wars, Kenobi fought many dark side adepts that were skilled with a lightsaber. This included Maul, Asajj Ventress, Savage Opress, and Grievous. In almost every duel, Kenobi kept his cool and survived, often winning even when the odds were not in his favour. A notable exception to this is his duels with Count Dooku, but we will explore why Kenobi was so vulnerable to the Count's fighting technique in a future video. Nevertheless, it is important to realise that Kenobi truly was a master of lightsaber combat by the time of Mustafar. Many believe that General Grievous was underwhelmingly weak in the Revenge of the Sith, but this is not the case. Kenobi is just that strong. Grievous had single-handedly taken out many Jedi during the Clone Wars. Some estimates even put him behind Darth Nihilus and Vader in terms of his Jedi kill count, so he was certainly no pushover. However, through the use of Surisu, Kenobi was able to kill Grievous with little trouble. Kenobi's mastery of Surisu is incredibly useful in understanding why he won the fight on Mustafar. Surisu fighters attempted to place themselves within the so-called Eye of the Storm, maintaining a calm center and being undistracted by external events. This form of lightsaber combat was almost entirely defensive, the perfect lightsaber form for a Jedi with the moral high ground. The hope was that any opponent would become worn down by these constant defensive moves, eventually making a mistake due to fatigue or frustration. On the other hand, Anakin's lightsaber form was a blend of Form 5 and a little bit of Form 4. Both of these lightsaber forms were far more aggressive than Surisu. Both primarily relied on creating openings with unrelenting attacks and acrobatics. However, Kenobi wasn't just any Jedi. He was arguably the best defensive lightsaber duelist of all time. What's more, Kenobi had fought alongside Anakin for over 10 years and taught him all he knew. This meant that the duel was pretty much a stalemate for the majority of its duration. Both master and apprentice could anticipate the other's next move, giving the duel its infamous and naturally choreographed appearance. In the short term, this was an advantage to Anakin. As we've already stated, Anakin was marginally more powerful than Obi-Wan when it came to lightsaber combat, and certainly more powerful when it came to the Force. So surely, Anakin should have won. Well, not so fast. This was the whole point of Surisu. It was explicitly designed to help less powerful Force wielders defeat more powerful ones. Although it may look as though Obi-Wan is running away and on the back foot, he is conserving energy. This is why it seems as though he is losing for most of the battle. Anakin, on the other hand, is simply wearing himself out. This also had another secondary effect, which is an intrinsic part of Surisu. Darkside wielders were particularly prone to arrogance and overconfidence. Using Surisu's teachings, Kenobi was able to make Anakin believe that he had the advantage. This, combined with the frustration that the duel was not already over, would convince any Sith, in this case the newly turned Vader, into enacting riskier and riskier moves, making it more likely that the Surisu user would be unable to enact a devastating final blow. Ultimately, Kenobi was waiting for the perfect time to strike, all the while goading Anakin into his trap. And this is where the line, "I have the high ground," comes in. Kenobi's statement that he has the high ground was very much intentional, and by no means just clunky George Lucas dialogue. Obi-Wan was well aware of Anakin's arrogance and belief in his own abilities. Kenobi knew that Anakin thought that he was a more powerful duelist than himself, and would do anything to prove it, especially after a frustrating and grueling stalemate they had seen neither Jedi with a conclusive advantage. By explicitly stating that Anakin had lost, he was goading him into attempting the same maneuver that Obi-Wan himself had used against Maul all those years ago. It is very possible that if Kenobi had not said this line, Anakin simply would have jumped a little bit to the left to avoid Kenobi, as prequel critics love to point out. But the dark side and his arrogance clouded his judgment. Anakin wanted to defeat Kenobi in the same way that Obi-Wan had defeated Maul, simply to prove he was now the master. Obi-Wan was counting on Anakin making this miscalculation. Maul had only lost as he was caught completely by surprise. Kenobi was expecting Anakin to do this, and in line with his Surisu doctrine, Kenobi struck after his opponent had made a mistake, leaving him victorious. However, Kenobi clearly did not want to strike down his friend, who he saw as a brother. This is why we see the desperation in his voice when he tells Anakin,
"Don't try it."
Kenobi knew each and every way that the scenario could play out. He knew that Anakin would fail in his attempt to jump over him. In stark contrast to Anakin though, Kenobi tries to warn his former friend about his impending doom, again showcasing his chivalry and moral high ground. Unfortunately, Anakin was just too arrogant and consumed by the dark side to listen. And this leads me back to the double-edged meaning that we discussed at the beginning of the video. Yes, Kenobi did have the literal high ground, but he had the moral high ground too. Kenobi was the perfect Jedi. He was patient, moral, and self-reflective, always striving to do the right thing. He was a master of the most offensive lightsaber form there was, arguably signifying what it truly meant to be a Jedi. On the flip side, Anakin was brash, arrogant, and aggressive, the complete opposite of what it meant to be a Jedi. He had completely given in to his desires and character flaws, while Kenobi had long ago risen above such temptations. In the end, it was these self-destructive dark side traits that led to Anakin's defeat on Mustafar, making Kenobi's line about the invincibility of the high ground even more poignant. If you enjoyed this video about how Kenobi defeated a powerful Jedi, then consider checking out this video on the best way to kill a Force user here.